Okay, welcome back to part two of the Kindergarten Access for ELLs training. I'm going to go through this part fairly quickly. I'm going to hit the high points because you're going to go through a lot of this again in the online training, but this will really help you narrow down to some very specific information in your test administrator's manual that should help you as you go through the online training. So I'm in part two, and this would be page 21. The kindergarten access for your ELLs. So we've talked a little bit about the test design. All this chart is the same thing that I share with you in part one of this video. It's a blueprint, a map of how to navigate the different parts. So part A1, part A2, A3, and now you know part A1 is listening for on the rubric, the speaking rubric, you're listening for language at level 1, level 2 for item 2, level 3 for item 3, and so on. And then you do the same thing for the writing. And then the reading, you simply score that in based on the key that's in the student answer sheet. This is a semi-adaptive assessment. It means that different students will reach different ceilings at different paces. So some students will be able to go further. Some students may have a little less developed English skill right now, so they may test a little bit faster. Make sure you go through all the parts. So parts A, B, C, D, E, and F. Make sure you go through all of those parts for every student, even though every student may not go as far in each one of those parts. So when you look at the inventory, and the accountability department at this point has probably already shared with you that inventory. To actually give the assessment, you will have a storyboard. It's a big kind of Monopoly board that you can kind of fold out. I was not able to get a test copy this year to share with you, but at this point, you should be able to see those. You'll definitely see them in the video, but you have this storyboard that you can flip out. You have a student story book that you will also use. And this is all scripted. And then you have cards and a little card pouch that you put these cards in. And the cards are simply almost like flashcards with different pictures and different words and different letters on them that you share with the students based on the script. And again, this is all scripted. Everything is scripted. Test timing, it says it usually takes about 45 minutes. It really depends. Some students, you may test a lot faster than that. Some students will take perhaps longer. If you have a very gregarious, outgoing ML student that really wants to talk to you and offer a lot of additional information. And those are typically the higher scoring students. So this gives you an overview of those materials. This is one of the few assessments that you can actually familiarize yourself with the materials before testing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as I go through the TAM. So moving on to page 23, I did want to point this out to you because these are the test materials. You have the student book, you've got the storyboard, you've got the card pouch, and the cards are actually inside of there. And then you've got the script, and you've also got the student scoring booklet. So this is okay to do a mock administration. I would highly recommend that you do a practice administration, perhaps with your ESL teacher or another employee in the school who's also going to be administering the Access for ELLs for kindergartners. But you can do a mock administration just to familiarize yourself with the assessment, and it's okay to do that. The kindergarten access may be the only assessment that the state is okay with you doing a mock administration with a live assessment, because it's important that you get familiar with administering this assessment before you sit down. Accommodations, follow everything the accountability department tells you about accommodations. Remember, you cannot get EL accommodations on the kindergarten access. And it's also important to note that because of the manner in which this assessment is given, for example, you've got a human reading the items to the student. It's one-on-one. There's a lot of variability with how long it will take each child to go through the assessment. That some of your students that may get accommodations on other assessments may not need those accommodations own the access, the kindergarten access. But touch base with your 504 or your EC people to verify if that is the case. But that's important to note. So as far as administering the assessment, it's fairly straightforward. Again, I'm going to fly through parts of this because I've spent a long time already just talking to you about the scoring. But this gives you information about how to navigate turning the pages with the students. When you're using the cards are labeled so you know which item needs which cards. And that's what the card pouch is for. And when you see the card pouch, if you've never administered this assessment before, it will make a lot more sense to you. So if you're administering item B2, and item B2 has 5 cards, then those 5 cards on the back will have B2, so you will know you're supposed to use them for that particular item. There are sample items that you take the students through just to give them a sense of how to navigate the assessment, how to respond, make them feel comfortable. And I showed you a snapshot of that score sheet earlier. Make sure you score immediately after the student responds. From experience, some of these kindergarten students are so cute, and you get really enthralled with what they're telling you, and you may ask a couple questions, and then you get to the end of that particular part, and you'll say, oh my gosh, I forgot to score this, and you've got a blank piece of paper in front of you. So when you administer an item, if you're doing A1, make sure you score A1. When you do A2, make sure you score A2. So that way you don't get to the end of the assessment and have a blank answer sheet in front of you. That's not good. It's very hard for us to navigate that. So make sure you score immediately after the student completes the item. Make sure you use a number 2 pencil. There are parts of the assessment where you have a little check-in with the student. They're called moving own. Then you can make the determination whether or not the child goes forward based on the responses. But it's also just a good location where you can check in with the student to make sure they're doing okay. This gives you a little more information about how to navigate the assessment. There are expect boxes built into the student response booklet where you can see, in addition to the rubric, the speaking and the writing rubric, there are expect boxes where you can see what type of language you can expect for that particular item. So they make it very clear for you. You can encouraging students. So this is always an interesting part. Basically, it doesn't matter if the student's response is correct or incorrect. The child always did very good because you just want to make sure the child is having a good experience. This is an assessment. This is not an instructional opportunity. So that's an important distinction. So since this is an assessment, we want to make the child feel good and have a positive experience. We don't want them to walk away feeling a lot of anxiety, but it's also not a teaching moment. So if they've done something incorrectly, instead of saying, no, you did that wrong, you would say, very good. They've met their ceiling perhaps. You end the assessment or end that part there and you go to the next part or you finish the assessment. So if you watch the video, you will see the test administrator. When you watch the video, you will see the trainer using the phrase very good very, very frequently. Taking breaks and restarting, that is all scripted for you. At the top of Part D, between Part C and Part D, there you'll see this item. So this is a good place to take a break if you need to take a break. If the child's getting antsy or showing some anxiety or needs to get around, walk around, go to the bathroom, whatever, this is a good place to take that break between Part C and Part D. And then if you take a break, you simply bubble in how many break sessions you took, or if you didn't take a break, you would bubble in the first box. Winding down gives you information about how to, once the child has reached their ceiling, how to kind of make this a positive experience and wind down the assessment. So the listening and speaking tasks are administered together, and you can see that from the answer sheet snapshot that I shared with you earlier. We've talked about this being an adaptive assessment. Read the script exactly as it's printed, moving on to page 27. So if the script gives you options, basically that gives you an option to try to elicit speech from the child. So if the question that you're asking for that particular item, for whatever reason, doesn't click with that child, you can ask another optional question. And again, that's all scripted. And the purpose of that is to simply give the child as many opportunities as possible to respond, to produce language that you can then score. So we've talked about the question mark here. You cannot repeat the listening tasks unless there's significant disturbance. If the child asks you to repeat a speaking item, then you can repeat this item one time. We've talked about how to score this, how to score correct and incorrect. If they meet the expectation for level 5, then you would bubble and meet. If you're not sure, you'll put a check mark here and go to the next item. And then if they do not meet that expectation for level 5 based on the rubric, you would put approaches. And again, this is all scripted for you. Note that sometimes a listening item may require 2 actions, so it's kind of a 2-part question. But again, if you practice this assessment, and I highly recommend you practice this assessment before you administer it to begin with, that will become very clear to you. And of course, you're scoring this holistically. And we talked about you're scoring this based on the speaking rubric or the writing rubric that I showed you in the appendix. We talked about the expect boxes, a little more information here. Now, I did point out here that I find this blue box a little confusing because it seems like there's a little disagreement between what is in the rubric and then what is in the expect box at level 3. You would think that the WIDA consortia would actually be able to resolve that, but they're just kind of highlighting this disconnect between the expect box and the rubric. But when in doubt, refer to the rubric. We talked about the question mark. That's really a placeholder until you have more information on what a child knows by administering the next item. And if the child meets the expectation for the next item, you go back, you erase the question mark box, and then you can make a determination whether the child meets or was approaching that previous item. So the first box on this page, on page 29, refers to the child's ceiling. So just remember the child's ceiling is when they get to a point where they can't go any further in the assessment based on the movie known box in the answer sheet. So, okay, quickly through the writing test. So now you're to the writing components, parts B and part E. They respond to their prompts. They write into the student response booklet, which is the same place that you are recording their responses. So you would simply give the response book to them, they would respond, and then you would score it based on the rubric. This gives you information about how to administer the writing test. It says, the third bullet here says scaffold the open-ended writing tasks, but I use that term a little differently. So the student at this point, you can't help the child with the test, but you can answer any questions they have before you begin reading that script to them. And then you transcribe what they tell you they wrote for this particular part in the student response booklet. Part B is fairly straightforward. Remember, Part B informs you as to where you will start in Part E. And then scoring the writing test is based on that writing rubric that I showed you in the back of the document. So I'm not going to go into great detail here. You can read through this. You're going to get practice online as you go through the online training part. And then the reading assessment, this gives you an overview of what you should expect at level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this simply gives you an overview of how to manage the script, how to score it, and I